Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the February Environment Committee meeting here at City Hall. We have a few items of business to go through before we move to our guests, but for members of the public who are following today's events on via the webcast or on Twitter, there are a number of hashtags that are being used, and the hashtag for the committee is hashtag Assembly Environ, ENV, and hashtag bottled water, as that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Can I just find out if we've received any apologies for absence?
Chair, we have apologies from Assembly Member Curtin.
So we've had apologies for absence from Assembly Member David Curtin. The next item is item 2, which relates to the declaration of interests, which are listed in the report on pages 1 to 4. Can I just see if the declarations of interest is accepted, and has anyone got any further declarations to make in regard to the business of today's meeting?
No further declarations.
No, okay, so those are accepted. The next item is the acceptance of the minutes from the previous meeting, item 3, and the minutes are to be found at pages 5 to 52. Can we agree that those minutes are a correct record and that I can then sign them? That's 19th of January meeting, thank you. And we have a summary list of actions. Is everyone minded to note that list of actions?
Noted.
And finally, 5, item 5, which is action taken under delegated authority, and we actually have had quite an amount of activity and exchange via the email in finalising our letter to the Mayor on environmental priorities. So if you'd note that that has now been sent, and we've also written to Heathrow Airport Limited about the environmental impacts of the potential expansion of Heathrow Airport. Are those matters noted?
Noted.
Moving swiftly on and to the main item of today's business, which is item 6, which is on plastic bottled water. And before we just move into the discussion with our guests, and you're very welcome and we're very grateful that you've been able to join us today, we've circulated around to the members of the committee the scope and the terms of reference for the investigation, and can everyone agree that that is the outline of what we're going to be looking at? Agreed. If that's agreed. In which case, I'm then going to move to welcoming our guests, starting with Patrick Feely, who's the Assistant Director of Environment here at the Greater London Authority. You're very welcome, Patrick. Thank you for coming again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'd also like to welcome Nick Davis, who's here from Hydrochill. Thank you very much for joining us. We have Kinvara Carey, who's here from the Natural Hydration Council. Hugo Tagholm, who's here from Surfers Against Sewage. We have Fiona Llewellyn. Thank you very much for coming. She's from ZSL and is the project manager for the hashtag One Less campaign. Another hashtag for everyone to remember. And finally, last but definitely not least, we've also got Claire Shrewsbury, who is from RAP, which is the Waste and Resources Action Programme. Thank you very much for coming today. And we're going to move straight into some questions, and I'm afraid we're going to start with me, but then we will be moving on to everyone else. And some people have got some questions that they may throw in at various intervals, but we will start with my group of questions first. So my question, which I'd like to start with Patrick, Kinvara and Fiona, which is about the level of consumption of plastic bottled water in London each year. How much is now being consumed? Because our understanding from the figures that we had is that it's a very high level, and what do we perceive the trends to be around that? Patrick, perhaps I'll start with you.
Yes, this is actually bizarrely something I have quite a long history with, because I was tasked under the previous administration to look at drinking fountains and the provision of drinking fountains, and that's how I've come to
Just
know Nick.
before you go any further, can I just ask all guests to definitely speak up, because I know that we had some terrible problems with the confirmation hearing on Monday when we could barely actually hear someone who in fact who used to work at RAP, Liz Goodwin, and I know that we have had issues with some of the Assembly members not being able to hear. So sorry to interrupt.
So I was just recounting that I have had some experience on the drinking fountains front before, and bottled water, and trying to establish a campaign under the previous administration to try and provide access to free drinking water on the go. So it's something I think in London we've been looking at for quite some time. What we did establish, probably unsuccessfully, was that there wasn't really a silver bullet in terms of providing access to free drinking water, which is the flip side of trying to get people to stop purchasing bottled water, which I think we all agree is a key thing to do in London. The statistics are a bit varied in terms of how specific we can be. So speaking to the waste team, we understand that in the UK we consume 4.5 billion litres of soft drinks in 2013. That is 230 litres per person. I think the positive thing is at least some of that is water and not all fizzy drinks. So 16% is estimated to be bottled water. Of the million tonnes of recyclable waste from households per year in London, 7,000 is separately collected plastic, so that's mainly plastic bottles, and 480,000 tonnes is commingled, and we estimate that 10% of that is plastic bottles, so that adds up to 50,000 tonnes of plastic bottles are collected by boroughs for recycling each year. The thing I would stress is that is a mixture of different types of bottles. So that is shampoo bottles, water bottles, and milk bottles, and they all have different types of treatment. We don't have statistics on the trends for the consumption, therefore, of plastic drinking water bottles in London, but it is really a significant issue, but it's one that a solution has been certainly was outside the grasp of the previous administration. Thank you.
Kinvara or Fiona, do you want to add anything to Patrick's?
Sure. So just to echo Patrick's thought there, the statistics can be quite varied. And quite tricky to get hold of some of them. But there was some research that was undertaken last year, and that estimated that across the UK, so this is not London specific, this is across the UK, it was, just make sure I get it right for you, 7.7 billion single-use plastic water bottles, and that was water bottles specifically. So 7.7 billion across the UK in 1 year. And then when we look at wider plastic bottles as well, the figure, this includes soft drinks and so forth, and the figure looks at likely to be 13 billion per year. So that's sort of more than 200.
30 or 13?
13.
Wow.
Yeah. But when we're thinking about plastic water bottles, the most up-to-date figure that we have is the 7.7 billion across the UK per year.
If those figures are correct, that would mean that the plastic water bottles are forming about half of all of the plastic bottles there.
That's right.
Right, which would still mean that this is obviously a very significant area just to look at water.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Could I ask a question on that specific statistic,
Sure.
which sounds very specific, 13.7 billion?
Yeah.
I've done a quick piece of mental arithmetic.
Yes.
Doesn't that add up to in excess of 200, in fact nearly 300 bottles per head of population per year?
Absolutely, that's right. Yes, that's what that's the figure that we.
But that's bonkers, isn't it? I mean,
I agree with you.
have we?
Tony,
that's a bottle. That's a bottle per day, and you didn't specify whether they were litre bottles.
No. From my understanding, and I can go back and double check this because I don't have that information in front of me, but from my understanding, it is the single-use plastic water bottles, which I think are the 500ml bottles there. So the ones that we see most often as the single-use plastic water bottle that we buy in cafes and restaurants and shops and so
In the
forth.
briefing, Tony, if some of the detail that has been prepared for us as the Assembly members by the officers, it does actually say that the average is about 3 bottles per person per week. And if you think that some people possibly buy a bottle every day, then that's certainly...
It is a bottle.
But some people probably buy more. I mean, certainly I find that young people are particularly prone to purchasing a number of bottles as they move around. Some of us do try not to buy any bottles at all. Some of us try not to use plastic cups or plastic bags, but some people are less aware of these issues. I'm going to bring in Kinvara, and then I've seen Nick is indicating as well.
Just to clarify on the data that's been shared so far, I do have slightly more accurate data from IRI. I think the 7 billion figure is actually relating to tap water. It's 7.1 billion is the figure for tap water consumed in the UK per year. In London, for single-use bottled water, in 2016 it was 120 million single-use bottles. To put that into perspective, that's about 20% of soft drinks in plastic single-use bottles. So we're not actually talking about half of soft drink consumption being bottled water. We're talking about a fifth in London, and that's reflective actually in the UK. It's slightly higher in London by a percentage or so, but that also includes single-use sparkling water in plastic bottles, so the 550 ml. But just to take a step back, I'd just like to sort of say, to start with, that actually drinking water should be really celebrated and seen as a positive thing. We're facing a serious obesity crisis across this country. In London specifically, primary school children, 1 in 3 are leaving primary school obese. This is something that we need to address, and we know that soft drinks are playing a part of that. And we know that actually Public Health England are looking very closely at how we can encourage water. We've seen last year the publication of the Eat Well Guide with a glass of water on it for the first time, and that's a really positive step in trying to encourage healthy habits. And when we talk about water, I think we should all consider the impact we're having when we start to dictate where we should access that water from. So some people do want to drink tap water and celebrate hydrochills and more fountains and want it to be easily accessible. Some people actually choose a natural mineral or spring water because of its purity, because it's natural, it hasn't been chemically treated, and that's a consumer choice. But I think we've got to try and make access to water easier generally, and try not to put the barriers in front, because there could be a potential negative impact on public health. And I just would ask that that's considered during the discussion today as well.
I'm sure it will be, and some of the questions that we've got are talking about how can we encourage people to drink more water and make it more freely available. So I think that's a point very well made. Nick, I think you wanted to come in on this area as well.
Yes, thank you, Leonie. It's interesting actually to see the range of figures that are presented here, and I have different figures that I use from, if you like, within the water industry. And one of the best reflections on growth is that, to answer your question, Tony, in 1980 we were consuming around 60 million litres of bottled water per year, which is effectively a litre per head. The figure that certainly I've been using at the moment in terms of bottled water consumption is nearer 3 billion litres of water, which is in itself phenomenal. I mean, that's a 10,000 growth over 30, 40 years, and it's a phenomenal figure and a real issue. It reflects, as we're saying, it reflects the demand and growth and health perceptions of water, but there clearly is a plastic implication in there, because if you go back to 1980, the first water you'll recall were the Perrier type glass bottles that came in. And the strange thing is, if you think about it, the view of most of us at the time was, what the heck do we need bottled water here for? Our tap water is perfect. Tap water bottled water, I should say, was something that you consumed when you went on European holidays, because the quality of their water wasn't safe, or you felt it wasn't safe, and you wanted to come back to the UK to know that you could rely on our tap water. And what's happened basically is essentially some superb marketing from the water industry. You'll recall the dancing babies and cavemen running at volcanoes and the naked Jennifer Aniston, all kinds of things, making bottled water sexy, when all the time the quality of our tap water has remained consistently among the best in the world.
So given our water is safe in this country, and hashtag London Tap water is perfectly safe, I have no evidence from anybody here, and certainly haven't seen any that people have been made ill by drinking London tap water any time. There's certainly not a huge number of statistics of people falling ill. Why, apart from marketing, and taste in some cases, do you think that people have moved over to drinking so much bottled water. Do you
Again,
think it's just marketing?
Well, first of all, we clearly have a health perception. I mean, water is the preferred drink of choice now, and that's moved because when the first water came in, it was sparkling water. The Europeans were drinking still water. We started consuming, if you look at the trends, when bottled water came in first, as with the Perrier, it was sparkling water. But there's a clear perception, and started among the young as well, that water is a healthier, product to consume, and it's become, if you think about it, and the trend away from soft drinks and sweet drinks and so on, it's become possibly the most popular beverage that there is, certainly cold drink beverage that there is. And the marketing has helped it become a cool product. There's no doubt about that as part of that trend adding to it. So
I mean, where are the main outlets where bottled water is being sold in London, the primary location where large quantities of water have been sold? And has there been any impact in terms of on the sales around the introduction of things like slightly flavoured water as well? I mean, that seems to be a whole new trend as well. I can take Nick, but if anyone else wants to come in on that as well.
Well, funnily enough, I guess I'm a little bit of a poacher turned gamekeeper in this instance, because I was involved with PET, which is the material, the culprit material. PET is polyethylene terephthalate. It's the material used for single-use plastic bottles, and I was involved in developing it as a packaging medium through the 1990s, so I saw that growth and was involved in things like flavoured waters as well, developing the light blue colour of bottle that's become synonymous with flavoured waters now. And that trend initially peaked in the 1990s, and as with sparkling water has moved towards still water, pure still water, and the trend is very much still water, which makes tap water an attractive alternative, because we're talking about effectively the same product. So although there's a demand for some flavours with water, the principal requirement is for still natural water, if you like.
And the general sale, the outlets, is there anywhere specific that we need to be focusing on? Hugo, did you want to come in?
I would add to the complexity of the figures, actually. We believe that 38.5 million plastic bottles are used in the UK every single day. And our concern is from the environmental perspective, of course, with 15 million of these not being recycled and ending up in landfill, ending up being incinerated, or worse still, ending up in our environment, in our rivers, on our coastline. And we must not forget that London is effectively a coastal city with the tidal Thames. Walking here today, I saw a number of water bottles floating in the Thames and on the foreshore. And these make their way, often downstream onto the coastline, where our volunteers and our efforts are there to pick up this marine litter. But there is a journey from source to sea from great cities like London. Last year alone, we mobilised 20,000 volunteers who contributed 110,000 hours of volunteering time, worth £1 million to the UK coastline. And plastic bottles are one of the #1 items they see on the coastline, 160 bottles per mile of coastline. And it's clear that people are willing to pick these up, but we need to look at measures to stop them at source. Clearly our systems aren't keeping pace with the food-on-the-go market, what we see every day when we're running around London and other big cities, the pret-a-mangers, the eats. People haven't got the systems that can capture this plastic in the economy rather than let it escape into the environment. And we believe that there are a number of solutions to that, refills and water fountains, but also things like deposit return systems. We've got a petition currently running on 38 Degrees that in just a couple of weeks has had over 200,000 signatures calling for a deposit return system. Now, a deposit return system is a way of putting a small charge on a bottle to get that brought back for recycling. In
I'm going to stop you, Hugo, because we are going to come back to that later.
Okay.
So just at this point, as you can imagine, that's one of the areas that we want to consider. Whilst there might not be a silver bullet, as Patrick said, there might be a number of, well, you obviously can't make silver from anything else, but there might be some small bullets that added together add up to a larger bullet. Caroline wanted to come in and ask
Don't
something.
worry, it's all right. I've worked out how I can ask the question in my other bit.
Cover that later. Okay. I mean, actually, one of the other areas that I did want to just ask about, and we have been looking at the environmental impact, and obviously we've had some information, and I've spoken to Thames 21, and for anyone who does sort of local litter picks in parks or commons, you know, the amount of plastic bottles that you end up picking up is quite astonishing. And of course then they can go off to be recycled, but a lot of people do seem quite happy to just sort of drop them. There are the issues about carbon emissions and resource misuse, really, and the other impacts of bottles and packaging. And you started to talk a bit about that, Hugo, and I just wondered if anyone else might wish to come in on that as well. And I was thinking particularly of Fiona, because obviously from the zoological perspective, you know, it's not just along the Thames and out into the local marine environment. I think it's a global issue, isn't it?
Well, that's it. And you know, our focus at ZSL and with the One Less campaign is really about connecting people to the ocean and getting them to understand that the actions that we take here in London, as Hugo said, this is London on sea. It's a city on the sea, if you like. The actions that we take here do impact the wider ocean, and you know, the latest figures that we have on that is that anything between about 4.8 and 12.7 million tonnes of plastic is entering the ocean every year. It's completely unsustainable. I mean, you know, where do we stop? Where do we draw the line with these levels of plastic that are entering the ocean? So what we're really hoping is that we can switch that culture here in London, and we might come onto this more in a bit, but you know, the One Less campaign is about people being able to take a simple positive action themselves, and really making that connection with the environmental impacts that they're having on their purchasing choices.
And the bottles have an impact both if they don't break down and stay as a bottle, but they also have other impacts if they do break down into, we've had a lot of discussion about microbeads recently, and talking about removing those from makeup and other products, but the bottles have the similar.
That's right, yes. So with a plastic bottle, we think it takes anything between about 450 to 1,000 years to break down. So it never completely goes away. It just breaks down into smaller and smaller and smaller bits, and those bits of plastic will persist in the marine environment indefinitely. They are consumed and ingested by marine species, and then they can build up and work their way up the food chain. There's been quite a few reports coming out lately about plastic being in the seafood that we are eating. So even if you're not thinking about the kind of environmental impacts, one of the challenges that we always have, as I said, is connecting people with the ocean. You kind of think it's far, far away, it's not going to affect me in my lifetime perhaps, but actually we are seeing through the seafood that it is now.
Right, so chickens coming home to roost in one sense in that circle, if you eat seafood and fish.
And I will add as well, though, so one of the major concerns with this is that the more plastic that we see in the ocean, the more it impacts the ocean's resilience to defend itself, if you like, against other impacts. So where we look at over-exploitation of marine species, climate change effects, ocean acidification, the more unhealthy the ocean is, the less resilient it will be.
One of the other areas, that's what happens to the bottles after we've used them and then just thrown them down, and in the way that Hugo and Fiona have been talking about, they finally end up in places where they absolutely shouldn't be and then don't fall apart. But another impact is about how we get the bottles full of water to the places where people are buying them, and surely there has to be a fairly substantial environmental impact, particularly if we're importing lots of bottled water from various parts of France. I can think of at least 3 or 4 brands. Other brands are probably available that might come from the Peak District and so on and so forth. But whilst it is great that people are drinking water, there must be environmental impacts associated with bringing water from far away. And in terms of London, then moving it around on the roads. I mean, surely there must be some contribution to congestion.
Contributions all over. I mean, our estimation is, I think, from the stats we had when we had the campaign before, the carbon footprint is 300 times higher than tap water. It contributes to congestion. It's not reused at the moment because of the crash in oil prices. It's actually recycled, and it's not a particularly valuable recyclate. So there are implications it gets into our waste stream.
I missed your last point about it's not recycled.
It's not reused in the closed-loop recycling plant within London. It's sent as recyclate for use for, I think, what's called open-loop products, so it might be reused to make things like carpets and in nylon and that kind of thing. So it doesn't get back into making new plastic bottles, which would be optimal in terms if you were keeping it in a closed loop.
So you're comparing that with, for example, the ability to reuse glass or paper or cardboard, that even when people put the plastic bottles into the recycling, rather than just throwing them down in the park or the street, it's actually still not particularly...
Yeah, I mean, I would ask the colleague from RAP to whether or not to substantiate these figures, but the figures that we've got, I think, is that 80% of plastic bottles are not actually reused to make new plastic bottles.
Claire?
I'm not quite certain on the actual statistics at the minute. I mean, a lot of our plastics that is collected for recycling goes offshore. The plant down the road is just about to reopen, but that will be processing milk bottles, not exactly the sort of bottles that we're talking about here. There is a plant that does process PET. It's quite a tricky material to process, but our stance at RAP has moved from one of being insistent on a sort of closed loop bottle to bottle to one where if it's replacing virgin polymer, it's equally as good a recycling route. So the carbon benefits are there. So even if it's going off to replace polyester that would be used for clothing, then the carbon benefits are there, even when it's shipped to China. So, so as long as it's being collected for recycling, it will get recycled, and the value of PET is pretty significant.
And then Nick.
Can I just add to that in terms of the recycling process and deposit return systems? Our understanding is that with curbside collection of bottles, often there's quite a low grade of recyclate that's collected. It can be contaminated with various different types of plastics. With a deposit return system, particularly for plastic bottles, you can collect a much higher quality of recyclate, which then means the industry can close the loop and create new bottles from that, rather than it create maybe inferior products in a less positive recycling loop. So that is one of the benefits of a deposit return system, to increase the quality of that recyclate so we can actually create the new bottles for drinks again.
Yes, we're planning to spend some time looking into all the issues about recycling and commingled and sorting it. And in one sense, what you're talking about with the deposit scheme is something that would segregate out one particular product and bring it together. Nick?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, in relation to the issues on recyclability and recoverability in plastic, I mean, it's a very good argument for reusability. I'm sure we'll come to that in a minute. But to get back, Leonie, to your original question about what the carbon emission implications are for bottled water and the amount of water that's moved around in terms of this huge growth that we've experienced. The figure I've got for an annual carbon emissions from just the transport of bottled waters is something like 39,000 tonnes in the UK alone, just on transportation. And of course, a significant amount of that would be in London. If you think about it, the bottled water is moved from the factory to the retailer, from the retailer to the home, and so on, all at a time when we're having our water available to us, piped by the most efficient carbon emission method you could possibly envisage. And just to reiterate, I mean, 25% I think is the figure of bottled water imported from France. And I was at a meeting, must have been 7 or 8 years ago, with one of the leading French mineral water suppliers to the UK, and they were, at that time, transporting a train a day of bottled water into the UK. Now, I'm sure things have moved on one way or the other, but it was significant. It's a significant issue and a significant item in terms of the carbon emission element of bottled water, and of course it tallies as well with the Mayor's efforts to reduce London's polluted air.
Well, at least transporting it by train, which I understand a couple of the French big outlets do arrange to do, is probably less carbon intensive than having it being transported by road. Is there anything else that we could do to encourage manufacturers and the haulage industry to improve and use greener methods of bringing the water to us if we are going to continue to use it? It's a really tricky area, but it would potentially really help London with its congestion.
Well, my argument, Leonie, is simply that, look at tap water as an alternative and use a reusable container, and we're dealing with your issue on the issue of recovery.
I can see some nodding. I can see Kinvara would like to come in.
I just thought I'd quickly clarify again, just to put bottled water into perspective in terms of carbon emissions and impact. DEFRA produced a sustainability soft drinks roadmap, and that was in 2015, and it showed that actually 7.8 million tonnes of CO2 produced by the UK soft drinks industry supply chain, and the bottled water category representing just 10% of that. So if we come back again to what it actually provides in terms of healthy hydration, it represents 20% of the soft drinks category, yet its impact, it is the lowest impact on that shelf in a supermarket, is at 10% overall in the soft drinks category. So in terms of lightweighting, the plastic can be much lighter because it's only carrying water. There are no agricultural inputs, so there's no ingredients there to carry as well. So I think if you look at bottled water in the context of the soft drinks category, which is where actually it is competing. It's not competing with tap water. We can see the growth in tap water consumption and bottled water consumption alongside the decline in sugar-sweetened beverages. We can see that consumers are trying to access healthier drinks. And whilst I absolutely welcome more accessibility to tap water, I think that's a really good thing. I don't think we should ignore a category that is really striving to reduce its impact and has the lowest impact on the shelf.
I don't think we are. I think the issue for us is that we would like to see the impact of a product that is probably, in most of our estimation, a lot healthier than it would be to drink almost any of the other sort of carbonated and sugary soft drinks. But there is still an impact associated with it. So I think what we're trying to explore today is it is much better for you to drink natural water, even if it's not tap water and it is bottled water that's come here. How could we improve that even further? And that might be by getting rid of the other 80% of all the sugary drinks and still having the 20%. But the problem is it's still in the plastic bottles.
Yeah.
So that's still the issue for us as well.
And it should absolutely, I mean, there is clearly an issue and no one wants to see plastic bottles in the Thames or in the ocean. So more, of course, needs to be done.
No. I've seen Fiona, but I'm going to bring in Sean as well.
Is this the point to ask the obvious question, why is it in plastic bottles? Can it...
Well, that's sort of where we're coming to, isn't it? You know, could the water not be in something else that doesn't have this environmental impact?
Just to add to that, I'm imagining a carton, excuse my ignorance, would environmental impact of a carton, paper-based carton, be less than a plastic bottle?
It's a really good question, and I know that actually when producers are looking at different alternative materials, they'll be considering the whole life cycle. So looking at the whole impact and not just one part of that life cycle, because they don't want to increase an impact somewhere else in the chain. But I think at the moment, the reason why it is in plastic is due to availability and quality. And obviously it is a food product. It has to meet all the food requirements legally, so it has to be packaged in something that means it can be delivered safe and at the quality that is expected by the consumer. And also, it's got to compete with the other drinks on the shelf, and people want something lightweight that they can carry around. And then hopefully, and what we need to work on is what they do when they've finished drinking the product, and hopefully that will be something that can be improved in terms of ending up in a recycling bin and not in a river or an ocean.
Fiona.
Thank you. So absolutely agree with Kinvara with regards to hydration and how important it is. What we would like to see with the hashtag One Less campaign is where London moves away from the current model where it's reliant on single-use plastic water bottles for its hydration. What about a London where we don't have to rely on this single-use plastic, where we have the drinking water infrastructure to support a refillable culture, where it's the social norm to have a refillable culture, where everybody carries around their refillable bottle. And it's completely acceptable to go into a cafe, a restaurant and fill up for free without any questions asked, where offices and places of work have drinking fountains and public spaces as well. So we are, our focus really is on not looking at alternative packaging, but trying to shift the culture of London into one where it's a sort of a more healthy, freely available water with easy access for all, and it's just the social norm to refill.
Just ask Patrick, because I know that hashtag London Tap was a previous initiative from the GLA to try and assist with that process of making it possible for people just to walk into shops with, actually these are very nice Transport for London bottles with pictures of London on them, and just say, you know, I'd like to have a refill. And so that had some success, but perhaps
yeah, I
not
mean,
as much as we'd hoped.
there were two campaigns. There was London on Tap, and there was a campaign that I can't remember in the Evening Standard. They never joined for various reasons. I think, I might be wrong, but actually going into a restaurant and asking for free tap water now is a lot easier than it used to be. We were supporting the provision of drinking fountains because it was something the Mayor had specifically made reference to. This was during the time of the austerity measures and cutbacks at local authorities. Drinking fountains are quite expensive to install. There's a capital cost. There's also a maintenance cost. Thames Water introduced a policy which is quite stringent in terms of hygiene at the same time. So I think having drinking fountains, it's horses for courses, but might not always be the solution. But what we did find is there are various apps out there which you can advertise restaurants on the app, and they advertise the fact that they fill up restaurants and shops. You can basically fill up for free in those shops. So it's far easier, we thought, just to promote those apps and just get a culture of different shops, stores, supermarkets, restaurants, all providing free fill-up facilities. And then perhaps backing that with a campaign to get people utilising that. It's a lot more simple than actually providing drinking fountains. And I think the other facilities that we saw, HydroChill, for example, which Nick can talk about, that was trialled by Transport for London, I think, at Hammersmith bus station, and that was successful, as far as I'm aware. So there are, I think we got a bit hung up on the idea of drinking fountains, but there are really much easier solutions, and with technology and apps that could make it a lot easier to do, I think.
Okay, well that's really interesting. I'm going to bring in Caroline, who's going to ask some further questions now.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at reducing water bottle use. I think one of the, just listening to the evidence that we've heard so far, I find it really shocking that water is considered a product. Because actually, if water was just considered something to which Londoners needed access, then all the problems about the environmental impact, the transportation, all of that would just melt away completely. And the sort of recycling of these bottles. It is quite extraordinary that we've got into a situation where it's become, you know, there must be an awful lot of businesses that are very invested in this very carbon intensive method of getting water bottles to Londoners. So I think, you know, the sort of big question is, you know, how can we actually reduce the number of single-use plastic water bottles that are sold each year? And Patrick, you've actually already just answered that with the idea of an app, which sounds like something that are you suggesting that's something the Mayor could get behind as a mayoral campaign?
I mean, it possibly could be. I mean, it's not something we've talked about with this Mayor, and we are producing the London Environment Strategy, so we're looking at water and the provision of water within that. It was something that we got behind during the Olympics, so our Team London ambassadors were promoting those locations where people could fill up for free. But I think it does come down to kind of consumer choice, because every Londoner pretty much has access to tap water at home. So they can quite easily fill up refillable bottles and carry those around with them. So there are two issues. One is providing tap water, making it available when they're on the go, so when they run out. I don't know what the second issue was, but people do seem to be hooked on buying bottled water, and they do seem to want to do it. So whatever we do, I guess what I'm getting at, whatever we do has to sort of break that kind of connection, I think.
So do you think that perhaps, I mean, there are I think there's a messaging thing where maybe the Mayor could have some input, but I mean, there are places like London Zoo, Selfridges, they have stopped selling bottled water in single-use bottles, and they provide people with opportunities to fill up. So is that something that the Mayor could be promoting? For
It could be. I mean, I don't want to speak for the Mayor, but I think we have to have an alternative that's proven to work, because the thing we don't want to do is stop selling bottled water and then people are unable to hydrate in, you know, the heat waves, etc., that we might have in London. So, and my slight concern with this, and it is from experience of trying to make this happen, was that the alternatives that we put in place still didn't replace the consumption of bottled water. People still wanted to buy bottled water. And when we talk about things like tariffs and things like that on that bottled water, if we don't have an alternative that's proven to work, what we might end up with the situation is where the people who've got more money can afford the bottled water, can afford to stay hydrated, and the people with less money might choose not to. So I think a prerequisite of anything is to have something that's proven to work. So if you did have those kind of bans or that kind of thing, I think you've got to have some kind of trial of something else in advance of it that's proven to work and proven to provide ideally free access to tap water on the go.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, Fiona, you wanted to...
I think that there's a real opportunity here for London to lead the way in this, and rather than kind of going in at it from a negative perspective and kind of thinking about the things that don't work and you know, kind of bans and levies and things like that, I think there's a real opportunity for us to figure out what we can do to help solve this problem. So we're doing a lot of work looking at what we're calling the system of water, single-use plastic water bottle usage and delivery in London, looking at how it works at the moment, who's using it, who's buying it, where the intervention points might be, where some of the barriers to change might be, and really trying to understand what they are so that we can start pushing on those barriers. But with regards to London, as we said, we are here, we are sat on the River Thames right now, and I think we have a real responsibility to the River Thames and to the people of London. And I think that we can talk about this in a really positive way. We can combine the messages around hydration and being a healthy London and having healthy streets with the idea that we are, a global leading city that wants to stop this volume of plastic entering the ocean. So I think with regards to the Mayor and his messaging, I think there are things that we can do to encourage businesses and communities across London to make the change themselves. And so we're already seeing that with a lot of the engagement work that we've been doing through this campaign and through our members, working with some of the business improvement districts who are interested in this, working with other businesses, the London visitor attractions, streets and shops and retailers, so kind of making it more of a movement, and as I said, with a view to kind of switch that social norm and just make it easier for people not to be so reliant on single-use plastic.
Anyone else who wants to come in on? Hugo.
Can I just add into that in terms of sort of levies and charges, and it could be related to deposit return systems or more broadly, that we saw with the plastic bag charge, just 5 pence, a relatively small charge, a huge drop in the number of plastic bags being used. So in the first year, I think 6 billion fewer plastic bags given out by the major supermarkets. A huge popularity with the public, stopping the flow of plastic into the environment. So actually that behavioural change can be influenced by quite a small charge that people may seem insignificant in some ways, but actually can have a huge impact for our environment and to change that behaviour that Fiona's just outlined.
And so if we're talking about a kind of plastic bottle charge, is has anywhere in the world got a plastic bottle return system like there used to be for the glass bottles?
Many countries do. In Germany, they have a deposit return system, and they have lots of machines in supermarkets and other places where they collect the bottles. I think you get 20 cents back for a bottle, something like that. And they collect 98% of their plastic bottles for recycling. Here we probably struggle to achieve just over 50% in the UK. And so actually it's a very effective method to both trap that recyclate in the economy, increase the quality of it, and stop it leaking into the environment. It can also then help behavioural change. People might say, I don't want to drink bottled water, I prefer to refill at home or from a shop or an outlet or use an alternative packaging system.
And on a bottle return scheme, is that something that is imposed on the manufacturers, or how could something like that actually work in practice?
It is something that the industry would pay for. It would not be the consumer. Of course, the charge in terms of the levy or the charge on each bottle is not a tax, because you get that money back, just like you get it back from a changing locker in a swimming pool. So it's something people do understand. And actually, this is, we know that 15 million bottles aren't recycled every single day. And that's a resource. It's not just about it being in the environment, it's about a resource that we need to conserve for the future. And actually it's up to industry to invent and bring in the new systems that can help stop, the leakage into our environment, onto our beaches, into our oceans. We want to see a plastic-free coastline. But importantly, help change people's behaviour, because people are increasingly aware of their plastic footprint. I think there is something that is uncomfortable about sitting in a fast food on-the-go outlet and having so much plastic for one meal, and that not ending up back in the economy or worse still, leaking into the environment.
So the practicalities of actually, maybe Patrick, I don't know if you sort of know how this could work. Can the mayor insist on this, or is this something that needs actual government action?
I think before we get into that, we might want to think about the kind of virtues of doing it, because if you're looking at a return scheme, it's not something we've looked at closely, so I bow to a better knowledge on this, but you've still got the plastic bottles in circulation. So you've still got the carbon footprint associated with, producing that water and bringing it here. You've still got to collect those plastic bottles from wherever they're collected. It would be better if they were collected at things like supermarkets. So our concern about implementing something like that is you would be improving the situation, but there would still be environmental disbenefits associated with that kind of system.
So actually far better just to get people having access to tap water being a clear mayoral priority, and making sure that all Londoners can access tap water wherever they are.
Yeah, on the go. But I think I would go back to my earlier point. We would need a proven mechanism that would be proven that Londoners would actually use that. And that would reduce their consumption of water in plastic bottles, because for me it is a consumer choice, and I'm not convinced that by having access to things like drinking fountains and being able to go into shops to fill up, we would necessarily dent the purchase of water in plastic bottles. So we'd have to, that's not to say let's not try it, but I think we'd have to come up with a mechanism that would be proven to achieve that.
So I'm going to bring in Nick, who's been desperate to come in.
Yes, I am actually, because I think we've got some... Thanks, Patrick. I think we've got some measurable evidence from the Hydrochill project as to how offering a refillable solution can actually operate and is a popular alternative with consumers. Can I give a kind of a gentle background to how the Hydrochill project started? Would that be okay?
Very briefly.
Very briefly, it actually started at Paddington Station for me about almost 10 years to the day, where I fill, as most of us do, my water bottle at home, and then I travel, in my instance, from Wales up to London. By the time I'm ready to return, it's empty, and I look to refill it, and of course I have no recourse at Paddington Station but to go to a newsagents or whatever and find and buy a reusable bottle, a single-use bottle, which I then throw away. So Hydrochill, we work with the water companies, is about how we could populate those on-the-go areas with an hygienic solution, a durable solution that would give people that choice, if you like. And we work with Welsh Water, Northumbrian Water, Thames Water at various stages. And just to give you some evidential information, as it were, we have a project up in Newcastle, which is one of our very first, Northumbrian University, that took 2 of our machines. And within 5 years, they were used 1 million times between them. Okay? In fact, the first of those machines is going to break the 1 million barrier in itself this year. Now, you think about that, that's 1 million containers from reuse disposal, as it were, that one building in one city has achieved. And if you transpose that and think of it in the London context, the potential is enormous. And what we have found is wherever...
Just one second, can I just... I mean, do we have any figures yet from Selfridges about the number of people who've refilled at Selfridges, just to...
So they, within the first... across the summer period where they launched this and they stopped selling the single-use plastic water bottles, the figure that I always quote that I know, they were selling a whole range of different refillable bottles and had their in-store drinking fountains that you could fill up for free. The sales increase on these increased over the same 3-month period as the previous year by 1,780%. Because of the stopping of selling of single-use plastic water bottles, that equated to 400,000 single-use plastic water bottles. And then at the zoo as well, in 2016, when the London Zoo stopped selling single-use plastic water bottles, that equated to 160,000 in that year. So they're the figures that I have.
So almost 600,000 already less in circulation. So that certainly qualifies as hashtag one less. In fact,
Yes.
that's quite a lot more than that. Just before we come back to Nick for a further... sorry to interrupt you in that way. I'd just like to say hello to Kingston University, who've joined us for our discussion about plastic water bottles and their impact on the environment and what we may or may not be able to do about that. Nick, if I come back to you.
Just to briefly finish, obviously what we did at the more regional areas, if you like, was eventually picked up, and I know I spoke to Patrick in the early days as well, by the Mayor's office with support from Thames Water, and we were able to put the first machine into any transport sector, free water, at Hammersmith bus station, which was again successful. We've had it there for over 2 years, and it's been hugely popular, not just with the commuters, but with staff as well. They like it. And we've rolled there. In fact, we've got a machine across the pier there, directly from where we're looking now at Tower Pier, Westminster Pier, and so on. And they're absolutely well used. So people, if you put the alternative to people, they will use it. And I think that's supported by what Fiona and others have seen in other outlets as well. There will be a continuation, I think, in the trend towards bottled water, because water is a growth prospect, but you must put that alternative refilling opportunity in front of people, and when you do, they use.
Yes, we've got some very nice photographs actually of some queues for the hydrogel point at the Westminster and Tower Piers in August 2016, obviously at a moment when you can tell it's a hot day because everyone's wearing shorts and bare arms, so it's obviously very attractive as an opportunity for people to take that chance to refill. Nikki, I'm going to bring you in now.
Okay. I just, Patrick, I just want to go back to what you... Can you tell us a bit more about London on Tap, when it came in?
I believe it came in slightly before me. It was started at the end of Ken's administration, and the focus there was on providing carafes for restaurants. Restaurants that were providing tap water for free. It's responsible for the carafes that we have in the cafeteria. They date back to 2008. Then Boris made commitments around supplying drinking fountains. We integrated some drinking fountains into some of our major park schemes in London. And it was then that we found out it was actually quite prohibitively expensive on local authorities to provide drinking fountains, and that's when we went out to through a competition to see if we could get ideas for how you could provide access to free tap water on the go.
How you could?
Provide access to free tap water when you're out and about in London, and that's when we backed, we spoke to Nick, and then there was a trial with TfL of Hydrochill, but we also backed these apps that gave you the information about shops that enabled you to fill up for free. That kind of stopped after 2012. It ceased to be a priority for the previous administration, and we haven't really looked at it since, in fairness. But there's no reason that we couldn't do something similar around the 2017 Games through our volunteers programme to get them to promote individual stores and restaurants that are providing free access to tap water. I just wanted to say, on the things that we've heard in terms of Selfridges, HydroChill, all these things work, but the challenge is to take these kind of inspirational examples and get them pan-London, so that if you had a pan-London scheme that's reducing the sales of bottled water, it's matched by London-wide provision of access to tap water. I think that was a challenge that we faced.
And what, okay, so apart from carafes and water bottles, not water bottles, jugs in cafes and so on, and fountains, HydroChill, are there any other ideas?
Well, the apps that, for me, the easiest one is just potentially just having a sticker on any kind of retail outlet that enables people to go in and fill up for free, and then you can publicise that on a website or on an app, and then you can promote that, and then people can do that, and there's no real cost to that, as long as the shops have some kind of RAS certified system of providing tap water. The incentive for them is they're on the website, they're advertised, they're on an app, and that's enough, I think, to provide access. As I say, the challenge is to get people to think it's aspirational and want to go into these shops and actually ask for to have their bottles filled up.
I can see that Fiona would like to come in. I quite like the idea of this app, free
I
Wi-Fi,
do too.
Yeah.
free Wi-Fi, free water, come here. You know, it's all on tap, as one might say.
It's just a very quick one, just to absolutely echo that. So we are talking to a group based down in Bristol called Refill Bristol, who are doing exactly that. They have a great app. They're run by a group called City to Sea, and it's exactly that model with the stickers in the shops, and a whole bunch of shops across the city centre have signed up to that. So it's really clear and obvious to people where they can go and feel comfortable asking for a free refill. Yeah.
So there are, what I do remember, I didn't remember as distinctly as you just described it, the London on Tap, but there was a phase, a period, when you really felt if you carried a water bottle, a plastic water bottle around, you felt, you shouldn't be. And there was a very strong marketing campaign. And we don't have that public messaging anymore. And it seems to me that we need to adopt that. And we'd have to have a very strong, because we want the health message to get across, it's quite complicated, isn't it? We'd have to make sure that we were actually saying that, this is really bad for the environment. This is on tap, this is free. Because the markup on bottled water, by the way, even in the cafe here, if you go down and ask them, they'll say the money is made on the bottles. It's made on the markup on bottled water. And so it's so much cheaper too. And there may be a good, we may be able to find a good message for this. But we've also got to find, I think, a way of making these stylish. They somehow, it's not this, your bottle could be my bottle, but this is mine. Somehow it's got to be branded in some way
So
and
let's do some
personalised.
consumer research. We have Kingston University with
I was
us.
going to say, ask them.
Would you carry these? No, says someone. A couple of yeses. So, Fiona, do you want to hold up your alternative? Would you carry that? Oh yes, I'm getting some more thumbs up. So the issue about making them stylish is still an important one then, because there's no point having the reusable bottles if half the people who happen to be with us today, and thank you very much for forming part of our consumer research, completely unscientific as it is, but clearly if you have bottles like this that people are saying, well, I don't really like those, no, I'm going to carry them. I'm going to bring you in a minute, Fiona, but Patrick, I just wanted, leading on from...
To go on.
I just wanted to say, from what Nikki was saying, do you think it's likely that the pan-London scale-up might be something that could be included in the environment strategy that so much work is going into right now?
I mean, it's not something that we've considered as yet. I mean, we're on an end of May publication launch date, and we're still on for that. But I mean, it's definitely something we can consider, which is code for that means I need to go away and talk to Shelley about it and find out if we can squeeze it in. But I mean, I think we have had references to tap water, and we would, under current plans, have references to tap water within the current environment strategy.
Fiona, you wanted
Fiona, you wanted to come back on what Nikki was saying.
It was just a really quick one that we totally agree with your sentiments about the sort of the stylish barrier, if you like, to some of the water bottles, and that's something that we are hoping to address through some of our work. So, London is a global leader in innovation and fashion and design. We would like to hold a design challenge later on in this year to see what people can come up with, both in terms of how it looks and how it feels, but also in terms of the environmental impacts of the materials that are involved in these products as well, although they're refillable, thinking about the life cycle of those as well. So style is definitely on our agenda to address.
Well, there you go, Nikki. Style, very much so.
Fantastic. Can I just come back now to, maybe to Fiona, to Nick and to Patrick, just on schools, Patrick, starting. What about, because that's where we've had a lot of success in terms of recycling and other environmental programs. And I just wonder whether there's more we could be doing in schools.
We've got quite a decent footprint in schools through Team London Schools programme. We've worked with Unilever. We've got the Healthy Schools programme as well, which is run. If we were to do anything, I think it would be quite sensible and straightforward to reach out to schools through that programme, through those programmes. And I think, it's something we could do.
Because there are some, in our briefing, we've got some quite startling figures on the difference it makes if kids drink, especially the 11 to 16 range, if they drink water rather than drinking sugary drinks, and what a difference it makes. And we should be really, really, I think, pushing water. And also, I think, pushing the fact that tap water is free.
Yep. I can see Kinvara and then Nick.
Just say again on the Healthy Schools London programme, I know there's a discussion going on about making London schools water only and initiatives like that, which I think would be excellent. But I would just urge that sort of encouragement of an impact assessment or something, just to see what the impact might be on a school child who is encouraged to drink water but then goes to a convenience store and can't buy water, or sees a negative campaign about don't buy water, but you can buy Coca-Cola or you can buy another drink in plastic bottles. So all I'd encourage, and I think it's back to Patrick's point, is just to really understand the impact of any of these initiatives, because I think it would be excellent to have stylish reusable bottles, for more people to carry them, for there be to access to more tap water. But I think if you're going to do that by also having any negative campaigning against bottled water, that does send a negative message about water, and I would just encourage that to be considered.
Sorry, could I just... Well, hang on a second.
Why is it a negative message to be talking about dealing with a pollutant? It's as important to educate our young people about the dangers of these pollutants, because of that whole butterfly effect.
Absolutely.
The water they drink, luckily at the moment, is clear. But if we carry on with these pollutants, they won't have access to water that is non-pollutant. So I understand absolutely your position. What I don't understand is how you're seeing this whole sort of questioning and putting it in a negative context. It's about being positive by saying we have to find alternatives, don't we, so that people can drink more water.
I totally agree, and I think I think we have to be positive in our communication, and I think at the moment there's a campaign that we'll be supporting called For Fish's Sake, which is doing exactly that. It's actually highlighting the issue of plastic pollution, of littering, of encouraging people to do the right thing with their bottle once they've used it, but all types of litter as well in London and across the Thames. And actually there's a really interesting engagement programme with children in Canary Wharf, which is using plastic bottles which have been littered, making boats out of these PET plastic bottles and taking school children onto the Thames to do plastic fishing. Now that really does highlight the issue to them. But I think it sort of sums it up very well in terms of this is not where the plastic should end up. It does have a value. It needs to be recognised. We need to reuse it. It needs to be recycled. The only thing I'm saying about the negative is about identifying one category packaged in plastic, but not the others.
Yes.
And that's the healthy
one. Can't get
one.
Coca-Cola on tap.
Do you see what I mean? It's just, that's the only point.
So we'll just bring in Caroline.
That's exactly the point. Any kind of plastic bottle deposit scheme has got to be across all plastic bottles, and really this scrutiny should actually be about single-use plastic bottles, not single-use plastic bottles for water, because actually it's those soft drinks in plastic bottles that are causing just as much. They're causing health damage and they're causing environmental damage. So those are even more damaging to society.
I can now see half a dozen people who would like to come in on this as well. I think I saw Fiona first, and then I'll take Hugo, and then I'll take Nick. So we'll go along in that road. So
just on that point, so I think when we think about the water bottles specifically, I think they are an opportunity to reduce the amount of plastic that's going into the system. So when we think about your kind of reduce, reuse and recycle, we should absolutely be doing all of those things. I think the water provides us perhaps with a sort of, a sort of easier but still very challenging, if you like, solution to reducing the amount, because there is an alternative, because we are extremely lucky and privileged to have healthy drinking water here in the UK. When it comes to the other liquids and things that are sold and consumed in single-use plastic water bottles that don't come out of a tap, that's where we have to look at some of these other solutions as well. So like you said, and we've heard a couple of times, it's not one bullet that's going to solve everything, but let's think about all the things that we can do and focus on the solutions to these issues rather than the problems.
Hugo.
I would echo exactly what Fiona said. It is the reduce, refuse, recycle message. Obviously it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but the first aspects of refusing and reducing are very positive things to do. We do have very good tap water. It is freely available. It can be more explicit, and it's about the emphasis on that messaging and directing and signposting, particularly young people, towards that free source. It's a positive thing. It's not a negative thing. It's not saying that there wouldn't be the recycling and the water bottles available, but it's just saying that there is a more positive, more sustainable solution available. And it's important that young people, particularly school children, know that, and that they're not spending too much money on something that is freely available through our taps throughout London and the rest of the country.
Yes, I mean, we are extremely lucky. You arrived here today. We've presented you with jugs of water, as we do for all of our guests. We have jugs of water to see us through, the discussion this morning. There's not a single person who turned to somebody else and said, by the way, is the water safe today? Can we actually drink this? Everybody just got into drinking the water, and I think we can't. And I certainly know that Thames Water have done some consumer research into this, and it comes up as one of the top things that people are very pleased about, is that they know that the water is very safe for them, not just obviously in London from Thames Water. So I think we are particularly lucky, and therefore, of course, because it is just there, like many other things, we then completely take it for granted, and because we see it as being, in inverted commas, free, which actually, of course, it isn't, because we do, and most of us pay water bills. Nick, sorry about that long interruption there, but
no,
you wanted to come in as
not
well.
at all. Actually, what Fiona and Hugo were saying, I can entirely reiterate. But what I would also add, in terms of what we offer as a refillable, reusable bottle, we have to keep a sensible perspective here, because to have a critical mass impact, the bottles have to be affordable. I think we're very much in danger of doing what's typical here. We almost become like it becomes like a chattering class exercise where we say, we have wonderful bottles and we can do this, that and the other. And the question really is, can we make an affordable alternative or option available? And the education market is a perfect example of that. These bottles, school bottle, are actually sold into schools, into primary schools. And year on year and year, there's been phenomenal growth. And what it shows clearly is that teachers and young children are becoming aware of the issues, are being encouraged to fill with tap water, are being encouraged to look after the bottles and bring it back. But if we were to offer them a beautiful, advanced, glamorous design bottle at £8 each, no school would ever go for it. They have to be affordable. And I guess if you ask the guys at Kingston College the same question, you said, what would you like in terms of design? Would it be that or that? But if you said to the same guys, would he buy that at £2 or would he buy that at £8? You might get a different answer, hey guys? Right?
Don't you think
you could have a whole range?
Don't you think
Yeah,
it's horses? horses for courses. I mean, I think, you know, what might be acceptable to someone who's 6 years old in primary school, they may not be quite as focused on the design of the bottle. But we also want something that's going to appeal to people who are 16, 26, 36, 46 and 106. And they may not be the same. I'm going to bring in Sean and then I'm going to move to Jeanette.
Just quickly, there is no shortage of bottles. All you have to do is Google drinking bottles, and there's a billion of them. The concern for me, as someone who's new to Environment Brief, is what is the cost of making a bottle. That purple bottle looks significantly thicker than the single-use bottle I buy. Is that recyclable? Blah, blah, blah. And actually, the most important thing for bottles for young children is ones that don't leak. I have a 7 and a 9-year-old. We go through bottles at quite a rate because they all leak. I will buy anything as ugly as it likes, as long as it doesn't leak.
Okay, well that's yet another perspective on the style question. Jeanette, I'm going to bring you in now with your questions.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I want to carry on from what Nick said, because one of the notes that I made here, Nick, follows on from what you said, and it's to Fiona. You know, I love the Selfridges and London Zoo initiative you're involved in, but I represent constituents in Hackney, Islington and Waltham Forest, and I'd love them to go to Selfridges and London Zoo, really would. But they don't. Majority of them go to Asda, Aldi, Co-op, where. So have you got any initiatives coming up with the sort of high street brands that are used by the majority of Londoners?
Well, of course, it's certainly on our list. So I guess there's slightly different models there. So with Selfridges, well, they're quite forward sort of thinking in terms of projection, and I suppose have a different audience base to our high street supermarkets and so forth. We would absolutely love to engage with the high street supermarkets, and they're certainly on our list, and the sort of grocery stores, and that sort of that convenience, you know, shopping experience, I suppose. So, as I said before, we're doing a lot of work at sort of looking at the system map of single-use plastic water bottles in London, where they are. And I think that we need to do a bit more research and a bit more work before we go to some of these kind of bigger retailers on that. But what we would absolutely love for them to take up this initiative with us and look at alternatives for them to provide. You know, if they want to still have a place in the drinking water market, then what might the alternative look like for that?
Yeah, thank you. Now, I want to go on to a series of questions about mitigating the impact. And I want to start with Claire. Claire, according to RAP, plastic bottles account for a large amount of the readily recyclable waste, particularly in the healthcare and service subsectors. And you gave us some figures about the national average for recycling. That was plastics generally. I don't know if you can just tell us anything specifically, and if you've got any London stats in terms of how can we encourage Londoners to recycle more. So in terms of, if you've got it for water bottles, that would be great.
No, I don't have any water-specific stats,
Right.
but for London. I suppose what all Londoners have access to recycling plastic bottles at their curbside, so that's across London. What isn't across any city in the UK is a viable on-the-go recycling collection schemes, like on street. The sort of, we think about on-the-go collections in a couple of ways. So there's sort of what we call places like the zoo, where you've got a captive audience and you could provide some infrastructure to collect recyclables more easily than you can if you're the council and trying to put some on street recycling, because actually what you probably want as a council is litter-free streets. So you're grateful that somebody would use a litter bin as any sort of bin, and actually the quality of recycling that comes through those streams is often very, very poor. It could be a little bit better in those sort of capturable places. So London's recycling rate is slightly lower than the national average. But I suppose if we're talking specifically about single-use water bottles, that is generally used on the go. So there's opportunities to put collection schemes into offices. That's often lacking. That a lot of office where, you know, where we go and work, and we go out and we buy a meal deal, particularly at the sort of the retail, you know, the sort of supermarkets. You know, everything's a sandwich, a bag of crisps, and a drink. And if you're lucky, people choose the water rather than the fizzy drink. So having that collections, you know, having some form of infrastructure within offices would help. I know that the metal industry, AluPro, which is the aluminium recycling organisation, they have a campaign called Every Can Counts, and they encourage businesses to sign up. And it would be great if plastics, or, you know, people did the same with plastic bottles.
Okay, thank you. I know that we talked about the design features, so we won't go there again in terms of that being a way to encourage people away from the single-use water bottles. Have you got has any other member of the panel got anything to say about how we could encourage Londoners to recycle more?
I've been given some research recently by a company called Taylor Mackenzie, and it was done last month actually, so it's very new, and I'd be happy to share this after the session. 11% of Londoners say they've never seen any information on recycling. And certainly some of the other results suggested that more communication and guidance would be helpful, a better understanding of what can be recycled and why it's important to recycle, and more recycling points, so an infrastructure point as well.
Just a minute.
Do you want to come in, Nick?
Just on that, I just think there's quite a problem about recycling plastic bottles, because especially the bigger ones, they take up a lot of space. You know, they're empty, filled with air, but it's volume, and most people's recycling containers don't allow for much plastic in terms of bottles, and they go into black bag. Now, bags, I've been going around quite a lot of show houses recently, modern show houses, and the amount of space you have under your sink for recycling is now like one bucket, where everything else has to go as well. And, you know, maybe way out there somewhere, there's a wheelie bin. But I worry a lot about how much just goes into a black bag now, and it's just part of what, you know, goes straight to incineration. And I just want, I mean, it's just a point that I wanted to make, and I don't know if there are any comments on that, but I think just if we could reduce the amount of plastic bottle waste, that would be a good idea. But at the moment, we do have a problem. And I know that Leonie has been, I mean, one of your points, Leonie, is if we had more collections of recycling and fewer collections of black bag waste, that might help solve the issue. But it's still about what is the receptacle that we have to put our recyclables in. And it's just not big enough half the time.
Adjusting collection rates is a very separate discussion, and obviously you can only really go for less frequency on black bag collections if you've segregated out all the volatile food waste, which is, again, is I think slightly beyond what we're focusing on today, but some interesting points about how do we get people to actually participate with dealing with the bottles that they've purchased. Coming back to you, Jeanette.
Yes, Patrick, you spoke earlier about the good practice that we saw during the Olympics.
Yep.
In fact, I will, the sainted Dame Jenny Jones and members of this assembly were behind that push, because when we saw the plan, there was no access to water, there was no directions to be given, and so I think this assembly should be proud of that, a marvellous piece of work that we did. And that clearly worked, because attendees were given the information, told there would be access to water, and if you like, bring your plastic bottle and it'll be refilled during the day. Are we hoping to see that during the 2017 IAAF World Champions and the Paralympic Championships in London in a few months' time?
I mean, just a couple of things that came out of the Assembly's work on that. So LLDC has provision for drinking water across the Olympic Park. It's a requirement for all GLA events and LLDC events to provide access to tap water. So I think that's a given in terms of the 2017 games. I think what potentially could be different is we could probably do a little bit more in terms of making our volunteers or enabling our volunteers, giving them the information so that they could point people in the right direction of where they could fill up. Now that could happen quite easily in the venues, and I think actually during the Olympics the signage at the live sites and during the Olympic Games is pretty good in terms of how you can fill up. But again, it would come down to how you can fill up outside those live sites and outside the Olympic Park. So we could potentially look at that, I think, in terms of the advice that we could give to our ambassadors, but also anything we can do in association with that to actually find out where those sites are, where individuals could go into and fill up for free.
Yes, and I'm staying with you, Patrick. The mayor is now, as, according to the Evening Standard, a style leader, you know, which is great. And so could the mayor as style leader do more in terms of, you know, thinking about a campaign? You know, you see these awful hard-hitting, well, not awful, they're great, but, you know, we know that the shock value of seeing, you know, animals trapped or, you know, dying because they've swallowed a plastic bottle sometimes doesn't work. Is there not a campaign about a style leader carrying his water bottle around and encouraging young Londoners to do this, even a cartoon indeed?
I imagine he probably already has a water bottle, and you probably need to speak to him, but on that front, I mean, from an officer perspective, I think the key to me is if there is a campaign like that, we need to make sure that it's driving people to something where you can get that water,
yes,
and that water will then put a dent in the sale of bottled water in London. So that would be the bit that, you know, my team would be responsible for helping deliver. The campaign would be something that would be considered along with a list of other campaigns that the mayor may choose to deliver.
And it goes back to your point, we all, majority,
yeah.
99, unless you're homeless, of course. We start off at home and we can refill there. We're lucky in this building that on every floor you can refill during the day and before you go out at night or whenever. So the issue then, and you've just, I think, confirmed it, it's about access to refilling points during the day. And Nick, you're nodding. Is that one of the
yes,
the big hurdles that we've got to
Jeanette.
get over?
That's where it starts. And
yeah.
I mean, all the stuff being done with you know, apps for restaurants and shops is great, but not everybody is going to go into a shop and ask for a refill, particularly when it's for free, and you know the shopkeeper is doing other things, as it were. My issue and where we were with the Hydrochill project was to try and populate those kind of spaces for on-the-go users, the kind of areas where you're on the move and you want the choice to have of refilling a container rather than having to go to the store or the supermarket or whatever to buy your bottle. So we designed our unit around that. It's a form of water fountain, if you like. Somebody called it a 21st century water fountain, where we get the message across on the machine as well, so that we're encouraging people to think about the issues, as well as providing a convenient and hygienic refilling point. And we do find that people are using that facility when it's made available to them, almost without exception. And clearly we need to do more. And the issue, and Patrick's already alluded to it, is the cost of doing that to a certain extent, because you've got to get water through to the point, and you know the unit itself is going to cost, and how do you recover that? So, sorry, Tony, you
I was going to say there's an analogy. Some of you were here when we were discussing exactly this point on the provision of toilets. would people go into shops who advertised outside that there was a toilet? We went through all of this, and there are some boroughs which have very successful schemes, and I can't understand why we shouldn't be thinking about piggybacking on that. The chances are that those premises which already provide access to toilets. In Richmond, we have a scheme where you have access to sitting down in shops. You only have a little, and you have a little thing up. It seems to me that this is entirely a logical progression of that. Maybe we should have some kind of lateral thinking where we have all these things together, all of these things which would help people on the move. I quite like that phrase, something like that, Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, isn't it, on the move. But I throw that in as a suggestion.
Can I just finish my question?
I don't like Tony reading my mind, but certainly a number of councils have set up what they call community toilet schemes,
yes, of course,
as they've gone through the process of closing public toilets because they are subject to misuse and have become expensive to run. And you know, if you're going to open your premises to community access to the toilet, then it does seem an obvious thing, perhaps, to make it open for people to then access it for water. Jeanette?
Yeah, absolutely. We want every Londoner to be a good neighbour, including our businesses, and that would be great. My next question is to...
Can we just say goodbye to our guests from Kingston University?
Bye.
Thank you for your help earlier.
Bye. Fiona, your One Less campaign, I mean... I just want to query whether you're raising our expectations too high, in a sense, because you talked about 40 to 50,000 bottles of water were recycled after the 2015 marathon. Well, given that we don't have access to refilling these bottles, aren't you just like dumping on people who go out for street events and just... nobody needs the extra guilt. Right? Do you know what I mean? Guilt is not going to help us through this. No. So, you know, why focus on that when the issue is about how we can get access to London's wonderful water to refill it, rather than tell us that all these bottles were left? What are we supposed to do?
If I've understood, I mean, I haven't mentioned the marathon yet, but it's almost as if you've read my mind, Jeanette, because that for us, we use the marathon as an example of, wow, isn't this a challenge? When we're thinking about moving from a system that relies on plastic water bottles to the kind of the refill culture, when you look at the images of the marathon and how much waste it produces in terms of the plastic bottles there, that is the ultimate challenge, if you like. So we absolutely do not have all the answers yet, that's for sure. We don't want to make anybody feel guilty because we're proud of events like the London Marathon. We want to see them continue and be successful and be sort of world-class showcases of what London can do. But wouldn't it be wonderful if that world sort of showcase of what London can do, the marathon, was highlighted as a really sustainable event, an event that is friendly to our River Thames and friendly to the ocean as well. When it comes down to how you actually, what do you do? How do you actually change that? As I said, we don't have the answers yet. But what we're really, really interested in doing is engaging with people that are the experts in design and logistics and operation, and getting the most intelligent people, if you like, in London together to figure this out together. So rather than just sort of sitting and scratching our heads and thinking, oh, what a waste, look at all those water bottles that are produced at the marathon every year, let's see what we can do. Let's open up the communication channels about this issue and bring as many different players into the group and into the conversation as we can. Is there somebody within the design sector that can help us with this, that's sat there going, I know how to do that, and others as well. So definitely don't want anybody to feel guilty about this. We want to view this as an opportunity and a challenge where we help to identify those things that we need to overcome and then identify the best people within our communities to help us overcome those.
Oh, thank you for that. I have to go back to Patrick for a couple of questions. Now, Patrick, I think you're saying you can't speak for our London's #1 style leader. So,
not on style.
not on style. But what might he do to encourage, say, football clubs to reduce plastic bottle sales at grounds and stadiums? What do you think? Because you're the expert.
From Sutton upon.
I mean, what you potentially could do is encourage sports organisations to sign up to an environmental standard, so an environmental management system, and then through that they'd work out the way they have the most impact and areas, touch points where they can reduce that impact. I think through all the bids that we put in for things like the Euro finals, we've stipulated in our bids that they'll have to be signed up to an environmental standard. I think Wembley is. I don't know whether Wembley actually sells bottled water, but we do require that we have said in those bid documents that there will be access to tap water at those major events. So I think we can influence through that. I don't know if the mayor has actual powers to say to a football club they can't sell bottled
no,
water.
he doesn't. Clearly, he doesn't have powers. But if we were dependent, your work would be halved if we were going to be dependent on mayoral powers.
Yeah.
And you might want that, but that's not the case. What the mayor is the mayor represents us as Londoners, and so if the mayor has a will, he has Londoners behind him, and can influence. The power of influence is sometimes greater than having...
And I suppose, like you say, it's a power of positive example. So we've done what we can in terms of City Hall. You have access to free tap water here. We've done what we can in terms of LLDC. We've done what we can in terms of all our major events. We have a drinking fountain at Trafalgar Square. So it's influencing, I think, that way.
Yeah.
But I think... I don't specifically want to talk about the mayor or football clubs, so I'm not making this analogy to those, but it is a challenge because, you know, retailers do make money from selling bottled water. Yeah. So if you suddenly say to them, right, you can't sell it, then obviously that's...
no, I mean, I don't think it's a matter of... I would never get in the position of telling people what they can't do. It's about encouraging them to better practice. I mean, I can only say, speaking as a gooner, if you buy a bottle of water at the Arsenal ground, you keep the bottle forever because it's branded and it tells you about the match you were at and also. And in fact, people come to your homes and take them away. But and I'm sure other football clubs do that. So, I mean, and in a way, that's that bottle has not gone into refill and is being reused. So there are ways, you know, that people can think creatively about encouraging people to reuse, you know.
Yeah, encouraging people to reuse, and I think giving them access to tap water so they can make the decision and then promoting that it's available. Yeah. I mean, it seems deeply strange to me that people would actually choose to buy water and actually spend money on bottled water, which is quite expensive when they can get it for free.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, that would suggest it's consumer behaviour, but also an access point.
In a minute, when we just finish with just last question, Patrick. In terms of the leap and the role of businesses in London, will there be a reference made through the new strategy in terms of sustainability to this body? Because they can speak to businesses across London, can't they?
Yes, we'll be engaging with the Leap, Leap, and we'll be engaging with businesses on implementing the environment strategy.
Yeah, and very last question. The London Waste Authority, now...
LWAB.
What relationship do you have with them? So how will we know whether they've got recycling of plastic bottles high on their agenda?
So the London Waste and Recycling Board has to be in conformity with the waste strategy, which is now subsumed within the London Environment Strategy. And the chair of the London Waste and Recycling Board is on behalf of the mayor, and also we have Shirley Rodriguez on the London Waste and Recycling Board as well. So we work... I mean, that's the official way that we work with them, but to be honest with you, we work really closely with them anyway on the delivery of our policy around waste.
So if they were to put reuse, recycle, renew plastic bottles high on their agenda, that would be a positive way forward.
I mean, reuse and recycling is already high on their agenda, but yes, it would be a positive way forward.
Of plastic bottles?
Plastic, I think, in general, including plastic bottles.
Right, thank you.
Just to add that RAP and LWARB have a partnership, a joint partnership called Resource London, where we're working across London to increase the recycling rate for Londoners. So, yeah, that's absolutely high on the agenda.
And Kinvara, you were waiting.
Yes, thank you, Jeanette. I just wanted to come back on a couple of the points that were discussed around events in London and how we can really tackle the issue of plastic bottle littering at the end of the London Marathon. We've also got the boat race coming up on the Thames, really another important event. And the clackers, the plastic clackers that everyone uses, ending up in the rivers, really not a good thing. And I just wanted to come back and mention the environmental charity Hubbub, who I would absolutely encourage the committee to meet with. They are looking at ways to reduce litter and improve recycling rates through really innovative and engaging ideas. And I'll just give you one because you mentioned football. But they were looking as part of a campaign which you may know about called Neat Streets, which looked at littering in Westminster. And they decided to monitor a street, Villiers Street in London, to work out who actually was littering and who do they need to target and how do they engage with that group. And it turned out that actually it was a group, you know, the target audience was young men, sort of 25 to 34 or something. And so the way that they sort of intervened and encouraged littering was to use a voting bin of cigarette butts, which was the main source of littering on that street. And they asked in the voting question, who's the best footballer in the world, Ronaldo or Messi? And people voted with their cigarette butts, and they saw a really good response, and it improved littering on that road.
I mean, that is fabulous thinking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we like that.
And they've been doing similar things with coffee cups in Manchester. They've had great success.
I hope they had Theo Walker there.
They do need some Arsenal players, but maybe that's Sanchez to make it. But yes, so that's a really, and that's what they're going to do with this new campaign. So they will be at the boat race, they'll be at the London Marathon, they will have interventions, they will be seeking to ensure that plastic bottles don't end up on the streets at the end of those events. So it's a really exciting campaign. It launches at the boat race, 3 sites across the Thames in London for the rest of the year. There'll be a lot of research, will be verified, supported, and a report at the end from King's College London, looking at the results, looking at what worked, where can improvements be made, and hopefully will result in something that can be taken to other cities as well.
Excellent. Thank you for that. That's cheered me up.
Shall we move on from you, Jeanette, to Sean, who's going to ask our last set of questions?
I want to move on to what the Mayor can do to reduce the consumption and impact of single-use plastic bottles. I feel like we've covered some of this area, so I want to do a bit of blue sky thinking. I want to pick up Jeanette's point about let's not just focus in on what the Mayor can do. There's bodies outside of here, and the Mayor can lead some thought on this. One of the, for instance, I'm of the mind that we need more than one thing. There is not one silver bullet here. I'm of the view that London needs some kind of water infrastructure. Listening to this conversation, I'm asking a question. Why can't Thames charge for a refill in order to fund the infrastructure? So I'm just, you, sorry Nick first, but anybody, and certainly...
It's interesting, actually. I don't know the answer to that question. You'd have to ask Thames. But certainly in terms of our experience, it's quite interesting. In the first units that we launched with support of Welsh Water at Cardiff Metropolitan University at the National Indoor Athletic Centre in Cardiff. And Welsh Water asked for a charge of 20 pence to be allocated to that machine. So you took your bottle in and you paid 20 pence for the water, 500 ml of fresh, chilled, filtered tap water. And the whole thing flatlined. Students just wouldn't use it, people at the centre, because they had that charge. There's a sense that tap water ought to be free at the point of use, point of consumption. If I just to finish, because what we then did, we ran some experiments, and the experiment was to say, okay, so it's flatlined at 20 pence. What happens when you go free? And we had a spike.
Of course. And
then we went back to 20 pence and flatlined again, free, spike, until we'd established a clear preference and a clear usage. And this is what we're after at the end of the day, people to use and reuse that machine, that water reusing facility. That when you offered a charge for the water, there was a distinct drop in the amount of people using it. Now, whether that would apply for London is a moot point, I guess, because you know, you charge 50 pence to go and use the loo at, you know, at various stations or whatever. But we've kept that principle of offering it free to the point of use for consumers, and it's worked well. And the issue then becomes how you recover the costs of that unit when you're offering the water for free. Because the 20 pence charge was partly to say, okay, how do we actually help the machine, the investment, pay for itself? So one of the things we did, again, it was with Welsh Water's support, we looked at an iteration whereby you could put a reusable bottle in the machine so that those who approached the unit, the refilling station without a bottle, could pay £2 or whatever the fee was, get a reusable bottle that they'd keep and retain, and that revenue from the bottle would then support the maintenance and upkeep of the machine. And that's worked to a certain extent. But what it doesn't deal with is the issue of, and Patrick alluded to it, people saying, actually, we make more money from selling bottled water than we would do with that. And one of the ways, and this is the next part of our experiment, one of the ways we're looking at that is, again, at Cardiff Metropolitan University, where we put our first machine in 2009, I think, the very first pilot, and they're still going strong. We've got 16 across campus, including one that we launched last Friday, and that's a very interesting iteration, because we have put media screens around the unit. And those media screens, in a university context, what they want to do is use it as an information booth, if you like, so it'll inform students about what's going on and stream videos and this, that and the other. But clearly it has also an advertising revenue generation potential. And what we're in the process of hopefully finding out as we develop that iteration is to see whether or not advertising revenue across the machines would enable critically free water still to be offered, but would actually pay its way in the sense that it then becomes, it breaks down that last barrier of people saying, well, I can't afford to do this because I make more money out of bottled water. And we don't know whether that will or won't be the case, but it's certainly worth trying and experimenting. But that is the critical issue, is water is preferably consumed when it's free, and that's the expectation. How do you recover those costs? And those are the kind of battles and iterations that Sue's really looking at.
That's not entirely true, because people spend so much money on water. So if you look at it from where the money's going, people buy way more water in the context of the conversation than they use free, and that is because of the lack of availability of free water. And the challenge, to my mind, one of the major challenges is, if we want people to drink water, free or not, we need to give some infrastructure, some place to get water from, and that's going to have a cost. And it would be better to have a slightly lower uptake of free water to spread that across London. And of course, students as well are a very particular group. It's one of the things I wonder about the success of the scheme in Selfridges, because the difference between Selfridges and, let's say, Asda, you don't go to Selfridges to save money. So you're in a much different frame of mind when you're there about buying water or getting a reusable bottle. When I shop at Aldi, my main thing is, this bill must be low. I must lower this bill, and that will change how I interact with bottled water or not. And they're the sort of things that are driving me here. What are we going to do to change that behaviour? But Patrick, let's just talk a little bit more about why we can't provide water network.
I mean, for that reason, we looked at this way back when, and the perception was amongst the public that it should be free, tap water, and people vote with their feet. If they have to pay for it, then they won't use it. But I think you're right. I mean, this was the issue that all of these schemes fell down on, was the fact that if we're going to do something pan-London, then we need some means of paying for that. And then we had a lot of people come to see us with various sponsorship models, but as soon as you start thinking about how that's going to work across London, with loads of different local authorities being responsible for putting in this infrastructure, so this is not the going into the shop and refilling, but it is putting things like HydroChill in those other areas. And I agree with Nick, there are a cohort of people who do not want to go into a shop and ask to fill up for free. So you need that infrastructure, but you do need a mechanism to be able to pay for it. And that we challenged businesses to come forward with that kind of mechanism to achieve that, and our commercial department had a look at it and they just said it's just not going to work. It just started to get too complicated. That doesn't mean that you can't do it, and it may be, you know, if there's something done nationally like the plastic bag charge, putting a charge on bottled water in supermarkets, an additional charge, and that's ring fenced, and that's provided to local authorities to deliver some kind of infrastructure, then provided it's proven to provide access to tap water and there isn't a disbenefit in terms of people not staying hydrated, then that might be something that could work. But actually the evidence is putting the charge on the actual consumer who would be filling up for the tap water actually stops people from using it.
They go and use a much more expensive source.
Bizarrely, yes. I think there's just a perception that because at home you can just switch on a tap and fill up, it's perceived to be free. You do actually pay for it through your water bills. And therefore, if you're doing that on the go and out and about in London, then you should also be able to get that for free.
So a wider question to the panel. Is it actually because we perceive tap water free or we perceive bottled water as better?
No, tap water free, without a doubt. Because we see the number of people who use the machines, the service, when the facility is made available to them. It's phenomenal. So we know they use it, but the preference is free. One of the, I mean, it's a very interesting area, Sean. One of the things that we thought about and we've not experimented with is whether or not, for instance, you have either an honesty box or some kind of association whereby you pay 20 pence, a nominal fee for water, and which 5 pence goes to some kind of charity, whether that would appease to some extent. And it's a possibility, but we have found that there's a distinct preference for an expectation of free water at the point of use.
Can I just
Vera wanted to come in
add
and
something which might be helpful? I think when it comes to why people choose bottled water, there are lots of different reasons, and I think it would be useful to sort of go through those as well, looking at this issue. I think encouraging tap water and getting people to switch from the category of bottled water to tap water is possible if tap water is more accessible and convenient for some people. But for other people, it should be recognised that bottled water, over 90% of it, is naturally sourced. It's a natural mineral or spring water, and some people do actually value that. They do want to choose something that is natural, that has come from a recognised source, an underground source that hasn't been chemically treated. So I think just some understanding of the reasons why people choose bottled water as well should be considered. And lots of people will drink both, so we know convenience is a big factor too. And obviously,
Do you have any idea which is the biggest factor?
I think convenience is probably one of the biggest factors, but I think also the other really big factor is the naturalness of a natural mineral or spring water. And that's not, I think there is a perception that bottled water is literally tap water in plastic. And lots of people do have a good understanding that that's not the case. So I think it's trying to understand who the people are that buy bottled water will help in trying to come up with these solutions of improving tap water consumption as well.
Just to zero back in.
Sean, I think Hugo wanted to come in as well.
I would just add to that there's obviously a huge marketing budget and drive and global advertising drive towards pushing people towards bottled water. That does propagate those messages about it being natural and more healthy and what you need to hydrate. And actually, it's not necessarily proven that it is any better than tap water.
For hydration,
And so I think we haven't got that might of advertising yet for this refill scheme, which is where that emphasis needs to come in terms of the reuse and reducing plastics, and then recycling coming down at the sort of bottom of the pyramid, basically. So I think that's really important to recognise, and we need more might behind that to promote refills, to promote the stations, to make sure people can access it and see it as a natural, healthy, free source of hydration that is good for them and good for their pocket.
That feels like something more the Mayor could do. Is there any other suggestions around what the Mayor can do from a point of infrastructure, promotion, anything?
What we're quite interested in doing, and this point's come up a number of times, is about the proof, what we need in terms of evidence to say that people, if plastic water bottles aren't available, that they will switch to refilling and using water rather than switching to the sugary drinks and so forth. We're really interested in setting up pilot zones, if you like, around London, working with people in whether it's a community area, whether it's a city bridge area here, businesses or geographical zones, sort of one less pilot zones, to see what happens when you do start making the switch in these areas and you do work with the communities and the businesses and the schools and the people in those areas to help them make the switch. So if retailers stop selling the single-use plastic water bottles and offer free drinking water or paid drinking water, whatever, it's an experiment at the end of the day. So I'd love to see the Mayor get behind some of these experimental areas. And so rather than kind of sitting back and saying, oh, well, we don't have all the answers, so therefore we can't do anything, let's have a look at these areas. We can use him, as you say, as the style leader and see if it works in these areas, gather the evidence and understand if it's not working, why it's not working. And if it is working, then how we scale this up across other communities throughout London.
Okay. Interesting. I'm just going to bring in Caroline, who wants to add something in as well, Sean.
Yeah, just picking up when Hugo was just speaking, the idea of promoting refills as an alternative to bottled water, surely we should actually be doing all this work promoting refills as an alternative to bottled drinks, so that we're actually moving people towards drinking tap water as opposed to drinking sugary drinks, as well as opposed to drinking the bottled water. So that's just what's been coming out of this really clearly this morning. Is this mustn't risk demonising bottled water as opposed to bottled drinks. And I just wonder if anyone is doing any work at the moment promoting refills as opposed to bottled drinks rather than refills as opposed to bottled water.
I would definitely support that.
We would, and I think it's a reflection of how dissipated this sector is, really, when it's juxtaposed against the enormous marketing resource of the bottled water industry. We've seen this growth in the last 15, 20 years is phenomenal, all the advertising and mechanisms around that, and we're kind of a bunch of individuals doing our best to push the reusability, refillability route, but doing it pretty much ourselves, and I think we need better collaboration in terms of what we do with that.
There's also a really nice initiative that the local government association announced, I think it was about a year ago, that all restaurants should provide a jug of water on the table when you come in. So I think there are some really simple things that it's about getting people into the habit of drinking water, because I would also highlight that's actually another thing to be made aware of, that 60% of the population as a whole, and I don't have the London data, drinks 1 serving or less of water a day. So this is a big challenge anyway, to get people to drink plain water. So any infrastructure that can be put in place to encourage water consumption is a really positive thing for health.
I absolutely agree with that, and I think as well as all of these kind of big infrastructure challenges that we're identifying along the way, there is something to be said about appealing to the individual as well, and we're asking people to individually take the one less pledge and say, I'm going to stop using single-use plastic water bottles, actually. I'm going to do my absolute best just to carry my refillable and not purchase any more and not contribute to those levels of single-use plastic water bottles that are in our system and leaking into our environment. So if we can get people like the Mayor across London and other people that we look up to, whether it's celebrities or personalities or sports personalities with all the sort of sporting events that are coming up across the year, people to say, hey, I don't need to be contributing to this issue. I'm gonna go one less and use a refillable.
I like the technique that you were using at the Selfridges One Less event, where people were being photographed with their reusable bottles and then being asked to tweet the pictures of themselves with their reusable bottle. Yes. And obviously, in your case, using the hashtag One Less in the tweets. And I think perhaps that kind of social media approach when there's large sporting events could be helpful. Sean, coming back to you.
Just to have a little exploration of deposit return schemes and how they work in other places, and could you see something being done here like that by the Mayor either promoting it or using GLA facilities to actually deliver that service. Because one of the things that's apparent to me as a Londoner is just the lack of litter bins. I have litter right in front of me now because there's nowhere to put it. And I wonder if that's part of the problem.
I absolutely think that there's a good opportunity to bring deposit return systems in. They're a proven mechanism to control, to collect recyclate, valuable recyclate, and stop littering. I think there's a wider question on that in terms of litter bins, which is interesting, which is that these are high volume items, which I know has already come up today. So they take up a lot of space in the litter bins that are there already, up to 40% of that space. So actually by having a deposit return system, you can reduce the volume of stuff going into those bins, so they have to be emptied less frequently, which is a saving for local authorities, which is a great benefit to that. And so we'd welcome this. We see already, around the world, deposit return systems working. It's something that we think industry should be responsible for, because effectively the buyer of those bottles, if they put them in the bin, they're paying again through their council tax charges to empty that bin. So actually that's a benefit for the industry profits. So I think it should be piloted. I think the sort of pilots of things like one less and deposit return systems will have to happen and then propagate. So yeah, we'd welcome that. And just to sort of, and we've got an all-party parliamentary group meeting on the 9th of May to explore marine plastic pollution and specifically one less and other mechanisms to prevent it. And we'd welcome all of you to attend there, and we will be sending invitations to that and to our fellow speakers here today. And we'll be bringing together experts on all of these issues. So we hope you can join us.
Nikki.
Just one, we've heard a lot about, the amount of marketing that goes into bottled water, but there's very little marketing coming from Thames Water about either reducing your water use or drinking bottled water. Sorry, or not drinking, drinking tap water. I mean, we don't, the only time you ever get any marketing, real messages to London, is when there's a drought. And otherwise you get nothing. And perhaps I'm overstating it, but I really, really think that there should be some sort of partnership between the Mayor and Thames Water in terms of marketing some of the issues we've been talking about today. I don't know if there are any takers on that.
I mean, just in fairness to Thames Water, they were, not in the comparison of the marketing budgets that you have for...
Sorry, what?
What I was going to say was Thames Water were up for this before, when under the previous administration, when he made the commitment to drinking fountains. So they came up with their drinking fountain policy. They put some money into marketing London on Tap. They provided access, I think, to the free hydrochill machines. They then probably saw this drop off the agenda at the end of the previous administration. So I think for Thames Water to be involved, and it's not for me to defend them, they probably want to see a steer, quite a strong steer from this building. And then the apparatus probably exists. The website's probably there for London on Tap. I couldn't find it. I looked up for it ahead of this. So yes, they should be involved, and I think yes, they probably would be.
That's encouraging. Good.
Well, it brings us back to the point about trying to ensure that it has some sort of profile then perhaps in the environment strategy. Obviously not an entire chapter to itself, but some mention. I just saw Nick nodding. Did you want to come in as well?
Yes, I mean, I'd reiterate what Patrick is saying about Thames Water. I certainly wouldn't knock them because they supported us with the London on Tap campaign for 4 or 5 units around London, including the first at Hammersmith, and that's worked. And they've got other fish to fry, as it were, as well, with the enormous investments that they have to look at the moment. And then I think most of the water companies, or very few of them anyway, aren't particularly geared as marketing entities to drive tap water consumption and so on, because they do so many other things. And I think also it's a case, as Patrick is saying, about the kind of partnership that Thames would need to effect with the Mayor once again. And certainly they were instrumental in helping us with the Mayor of London's office sanctioning the hydrochill units as it stood. But in terms of how we, using the broad we here, those of us on the kind of refillable, reusable tap water access side, how we could approach this and how we could have some kind of marketing impact without that kind of equivalent resource. I think maybe a little bit off the wall, but maybe there's one option here, which I think you're all aware that San Francisco City Council have actually banned single-use plastic water bottles from January 2016. So they've taken a policy and said, we don't want anything to do with it.
They can't be sold in shops?
What does Mr. Trump think about that?
Yes, I mean, you know, if you check on, I mean, I haven't been to San Francisco recently, but if you check on the policy of San Francisco City Council, they've actually put a ban on plastic, single-use plastic bottled water up to, you know, a certain level. I think single-use plastic water bottles generally.
I think I heard Tony saying, I wonder what Mr. Trump thinks about that.
Yeah, quite, and I'm sure
I
it
have to
could
say,
well be
I wonder
reversed.
what Mr.
Well,
Trump
let's
thinks about
say,
that.
for
Yeah,
instance,
that might be a problem here.
yeah, of course.
That might
Let's say,
make
for
balloon.
instance, that out of this meeting, the mayor were to say he was considering something similar in London. Just say it. That would be picked up in the newspapers tomorrow in a big way. And what it would do, even if it wasn't to come into effect, what it would do is actually get people thinking about the issues. Why is he saying that? Because that's part of our problem. Not enough people are aware, in the general public, of the kind of issues that we're faced with, that Guy is faced with, and so on. And it takes something bold and big for people to actually say, well, hang on, there's a real issue at stake here. Could I begin to do things better? And then we'll see maybe people pitching for better access to refillable facilities and the like. But something of that nature needs to, I think, take place, that actually something of a sizable statement is made to kickstart, if you like,
That's
with the campaign.
one of the reasons why we're having this discussion today, to see if there's anything that the Assembly can contribute to moving this much higher up the agenda, in fact possibly putting it onto the agenda. And some of the recommendations that we might come out with might be things that you know, we might hope that the Mayor might take up, and they might be that, or they might be other things. I
wonder if I can ask a related question. You, right at the very beginning, gave us all the statistics for the amount of water which is sold in plastic bottles. How much milk is sold in plastic bottles? Is there a figure?
Actually, I'm not gonna...
It's relevant, because you could make all these arguments for drinking water, for drinking milk, couldn't you?
Different type of plastic.
Couldn't you?
No, I completely agree, but the obviously the whole issue, if you think about the first sales, which I think Nick referred to some time ago now, that when people first started purchasing water, they tended to be in glass bottles. And obviously we have, in an equivalent way, moved over from most people acquiring milk in glass bottles via milkmen to now most people going to the supermarket and acquiring it in plastic bottles. And I think there is a wider issue, which Caroline and Kinvara and we have touched on occasionally, about the fact that all single-use bottles are not containing water. Some of them contain fizzy drinks, but some of them also contain other products, and some contain milk. However, we could have had a much broader discussion.
I understand
and possibly not sufficiently focused in on something.
Yes, but isn't there an
concrete.
analogy between water and milk? If water is good for you, isn't milk good for you?
Yes, absolutely, particularly with younger children, it's very important. So.
It is, and I don't think anyone's suggesting that we would want to restrict the sale or the acquisition of milk or water, although we might have different views about fizzy drinks. I certainly have quite strong views about fizzy drinks. However, to try and come up with something concrete today, because I don't think we're suggesting that we have refill points for milk in shops across London, Tony. I think it would create a bit of confusion with us actually coming up with some conclusions. So whilst I think this is a very interesting new line of inquiry,
I think
it would confuse
things. I missed that point.
It's not really analogous.
Yes, you wouldn't refill a milk bottle.
I just think that would be going above and beyond.
Forget it.
Yeah.
It's not available, you know.
Just to wrap up, is there anything in particular that the Mayor could do to help the part of this agenda that your organisation functions on? It's very nice to hear from Nick how you could collectively come together. But is there something that the Mayor could do that would positively impact the work that you're doing in London to help Londoners, obviously not including Patrick?
Well, we'd like to see the Mayor take the One Less pledge. We'd like to see him talk about it publicly. So that, as we said, I mean, a lot of this is the issue that people aren't aware of it. They're not aware of the volumes of plastic that we're producing. And I'd love to see the Mayor talk about and be proud of the fact that London is a city on the sea. We have the River Thames, we have a responsibility to the River Thames, but we also have an opportunity with it. Let's be a global leader in this issue. and you know, transform London into a city that's far more ocean friendly than it currently is. And through that, if the Mayor could publicly support initiatives, all these experiments that we're all talking about to help identify those barriers to change and overcome them in creative and innovative ways, that would be fantastic.
Well, that's a very clear ask from Fiona. Does anyone else have anything specific that they would like to... I think we might have to exclude Patrick from making specific asks, because that might be slightly difficult. Kinvara.
I would love to see the Mayor promoting water consumption. I think it would be fantastic. We saw Michelle Obama do the same in the States with a campaign called Drink Up, which was hugely successful, saw an increase in tap water. It did include bottled water. It was agnostic to water type, and that's why it worked. I think it was a simple message saying drink water, and it was on the back of a health issue of obesity and dental health with children. But it has seen a huge increase in tap water consumption, and I think simple messages often work the best. And I think this is, when you look at the recycling issue and the plastic issue, that is incredibly complex. But if we're looking at it from a slightly different point of view and in trying to encourage tap water consumption, I'd say if the Mayor can support water consumption for health, I'd say that's a really good message, and increase availability and access and improve the recycling initiatives and access as well, and education.
A couple of other very clear asks there as well. Hugo.
I would invite the Mayor to join us on one of our beach cleans. We start them on the Thames too. We've got our Big Spring Beach Clean from the 3rd to the 9th of April, and to see that environmental impact firsthand on the foreshore of the Thames, on the beaches of the Thames. We find hundreds of plastic bottles, water bottles included, so we would welcome the Mayor along to one of our beach cleans. And we'll let you know more
I think
details.
that's another very clear ask. Unfortunately, I don't have access to the Mayor's diary for the period 3rd to the 9th of April, so I can't guarantee that he will be available on that on those dates to assist you. Nick.
Well, along the same vein, I guess, and it wouldn't take much of the Mayor's time either. He could walk across the bridge and go to our machine at Tower Pier there and stand along and have a photograph taken and say, on behalf of ordinary people, here's an affordable refillable bottle, here's a facility to refill it, and it can be done.
But obviously in the most stylish bottle available.
No, I would argue affordability.
Well, I think we explored the style icon. Claire, is there anything you would like to add to...
I think the Mayor is very committed to increasing London's recycling rate, and you know, the more that he's behind that and the activity that Resource London is doing to encourage us to use the recycling facilities that we've got at our doorstep every week, the better.
The Mayor has two major targets that this topic speaks to quite eloquently. The one is the 65% recycling, and trying to massively reduce all waste of whatever category, plastic bottle or otherwise. But the other one, of course, is that London should become a zero carbon city by 2050, and some of the aspects of the bottled water or bottled products of any description and bringing them to and from and removing them obviously do involve carbon, so bearing down on that as well speaks to the zero carbon city target as well. So that's one of the reasons why those two large targets obviously are in our minds as well while we're considering this issue. I'm going to bring the discussion to a close, and I'd like to say thank you very much to all of our speakers, unless you do want to add something in there as
I was just going to reflect back on some of that. I mean, yes, it does play into the manifesto commitments. Sorry, I'll speak up. I mean, the thing that I've heard here is that there's quite some gaps in some of the evidence. Some of the stuff that we've done on this is dated. We've looked at sort of bottle deposit schemes and things like that, but I think possibly the most sensible suggestion, I wouldn't know how the Mayor would ban bottled water across London, or whether he could. I'm not quite sure how San Francisco have done that. I know that they've done it in public buildings, but is maybe doing some more trials on an area basis to test out some of these theories. So what is the impact in a sort of business improvement district of a return scheme? Can we get some businesses to enable people to fill up for free? Could we put a hydrogen station in there? And, you know, what is the impact? If we did some sort of mini campaign in those business improvement districts, can we prove that that actually stops people from reducing their consumption of bottled water or other fizzy drinks, and is that because we've provided access to free tap water? So if we could start proving that, which we couldn't previously, then I think that would be helpful in terms of moving the agenda forward.
That was one of the points that I noted most closely from the discussion earlier, was that Fiona was talking about the potential for pilot zones, and obviously if you've got a bid, a business improvement district where the businesses have signed up already to collaborate in terms of that specific area, we've branched that out into having the Greening the Bids programme, and in one sense this could be a parallel programme to see how this could work out in terms of tackling the issue of reducing the plastic bottles in a specific area. So I think that's quite an interesting proposal, perhaps to think about as a pilot scheme. I am going to draw that to a close, and thank you very much for that additional contribution at the end there, Patrick. But I'd like to thank all of our guests for their contribution. It's been a really interesting session. There might be some outputs which we've just been touching on. So there will be a report from the discussion that will be compiled, and I wondered if the committee is minded to delegate authority to me in conjunction with party leads to agree any specific outputs that come from today's meeting. And moving on to item 7 on our agenda, which is the Environment Committee work programme. We have written to Heathrow, as you know, because everyone participated in the drafting of the letter. And I wondered if everyone was minded that we could have a discussion about Heathrow expansion and the airport's national policy statement at our meeting, next meeting on the 16th of March, and defer our previously planned discussion at that meeting on waste management from March to May, if that's acceptable. I would also like to add to the March agenda a short item on noise from underground trains, possibly at March or possibly at the subsequent meeting. I think all members of the committee have been receiving considerable correspondence on this issue, and I think we should consider that. And there are obviously environmental considerations to noise from trains, as there are from aeroplanes. And finally, to note that we conducted a site visit to the St Mary's Secret Garden, which was very, very enjoyable, and as well as being very interesting. And could we note the content of that, which was outlined in 4.5? Just to note that the date of the next meeting is Thursday, the 16th of March, and it will be at 10 o'clock in this very room. There is no business that I consider to be urgent, and I therefore declare the meeting closed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.